In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, grant us concentration that we may learn, listen, understand, have a peaceful mind, and remember that you're with us always. Amen. This video is going to be the first video in the discussion of plant structures and functions. And so to begin with, I want to start by thinking about some of the unique properties of plants. Okay, and so we're going to come back to these in a second, but the first thing that you probably think of when we think of differences between plants and animals is that plant cells have a cell wall and plant cells have a chloroplast, both of which are missing from animal cells. You probably think about plants being autotrophic, as we've already talked about with photosynthesis, whereas animals are heterotrophic, requiring other sources for organic material and energy. And all of those are very important. Okay? And we're going to spend time talking about how those unique properties are present there. What I actually want to start with today is talking about the difference in the life cycle. Okay? And so when we think about plants, or when we talked about reproduction in animals, okay, we talked about there being two unique types of cells. There was the somatic cells, and these were the cells that make up the normal body parts of the animal. Okay. These are cells that are not able to go through mitosis or through meiosis, and therefore they don't form the gametes. The other type of cells were the germline cells, and the germline cells were the cells that go through the process of meiosis and are going to form the gametes, the sperm and the egg that are present in the cell, present in the animal. And so there's a small population of cells that are able to go through that process and form the haploid cells that will be passed to the next generation. And so you guys know that already. So as far as animal life cycle, we would say that it's mostly complete animal is in the diploid cells, made up of diploid cells, with a small population that's designated from early in development to go through meiosis to be able to produce the gametes. Now, plants, on the other hand, are different. Okay? Plants, on the other hand, don't contain these unique cells. Okay? So they don't have the difference between the somatic and the germline cells, but they'll have whole portions of the plant that are able to go through and produce haploid cells that will eventually become the seeds or the gametes that will be passed on, as we'll talk about in a little bit. That would be, they have them listed here as sperm and egg, but we're going to talk about the pollen granules, which are the male gametes, and the ova cells that are the female gametes. Okay, so with plants, rather than living most of the cells in a diploid form, they're able to sort of flip back and forth between the diploid stage and the haploid stage. And so when we look at the plant life, we would say they have a haplodiplonic life cycle. And what that means is that at different points in their life, if we divide this particular image in half, the plants could either be primarily diploid cells, and so that would be the diploid portion. We refer to that as the sporophyte stage of growth, in that these cells are going to produce spores through the process of meiosis. These spore cells, or if we look at larger and complete plants, it actually is going to form a significant portion of the plant that would be haploid. This would be forming in the flower parts and the reproductive parts of the plant. So there's going to be some haploid cells that make that up. And so then they go through this haploid stage, which again we refer to as the gametophyte stage. And the gametophyte stage, or the gametophyte portion of the plant, are going to form the gametes that will be used through the process of mitosis. Okay? So they're not using the same type of processes. And so when we talk about the life cycle, the plants will go through, at least part of the plant, will go through a haploid stage or a gametophyte stage, and then the other half of the plant or other part of the plant will be in a diploid or in the sporophyte stage. And it's important to note here that we're looking at a huge different diversity of plants. And so some plants have very large portions that are in the gametophyte stage. Some of the ferns, some of the mosses will spend a large portion of the plant is actually in the gametophyte stage. And so they'll produce a small portion that comes out after fertilization that will form the sporophyte stage. And so these organisms that we're talking about will reproduce primarily using spores, and the spores are spread out and they're able to start growing again. Other plants in the plants we're primarily going to talk about, which are the vascular plants. The vascular plants are going to be made up mostly of diploid cells, so the stems, the leaves, and that are mostly diploid cells. For most of the plant are in the sporophyte stage. But then, as needed, a small portion of that plant will go through meiosis to form a gametophyte portion, which, as we'll see, and we're going to talk a lot about flowering plants, and these flowering plants are going to form let me say it this way, the portion of the plant for reproduction will form this gametophyte stage. So this is the basic introduction to life cycle, is understanding that plants sort of have the ability to change between these different life stages throughout different portions. And we're going to talk specifically about the vascular plants. And so most of the work that we're going to discuss is most relevant to the vascular plants. So vascular plants are plants that are going to contain a vascular system, and so they're going to have the ability to sort of move fluids throughout their system. And this is advantageous because we can be able to, or the plant can be able to then deliver messages, deliver nutrients to different parts of the plant. If you've seen on campus recently, there was a bunch of buckets that were put out hung to maple trees. One of the monks is collecting maple syrup or maple sap to make maple syrup. That's a great example of a vascular system in a plant in action. They're pulling the nutrients out of the ground, moving it up to the leaf buds so the leaves will then form out. So when we talk about vascular plants, okay, we can break this down into two different parts, okay? The shoot, which is the portion of the plant above the ground, and that's going to contain the different parts, and we're going to talk about the node. The node is going to be the portion of the plant where branching occurs, where the flowers will come out, where the leaves will grow out of. As we move up the shoot, we're going to see the branches coming out of there, okay? And then we're going to see the different parts that make up that, okay? These are making up, or the nodes are found at regular repeating units. We also refer to that as iterative units. And so that just basically means repeating. And you'll notice as you go up the plant, there are nodes located at different regular units based on that. As we move up through there, we can see where the leaves are. Okay? And we're going to point out 3 different parts that make up the leaf. The first leaf part is the petiole. This is going to be the connection to the stem, to the shoot, that will support the leaf. Okay? Thin extension that's connected to that. With the leaf itself, we're going to be made up of the blade and the vein. Okay? The blade is going to be the flat portion, a lot of cells present there that will collect sunlight for photosynthesis, and the vein, which is made up of the portion of the vascular system that extends into the leaves. Now, if we get a little closer look at the node, we're going to see, in addition to the leaf, there is the auxiliary bud. And so the auxiliary bud is a dormant, that is not growing portion of the plant, where a stem or a new leaf can grow out of. And that's going to be important for the branching of the plant, in addition to the growth of the plant itself. Now, growing out the ends, there's going to be certain modifications that we can see. For example, we're looking at the pea plant here, and the pea plant is going to contain tendrils. And these tendrils are extensions of the shoot coming out of the end of the leaf, and they're going to be important for support. They'll grab onto and be able to grow around things. The last portion, or last 2 portions that I want to talk about, is first the flower, okay? Or we could call it the reproductive portion. Okay? So in this case, we're actually looking at this, a flowering plant. We'll talk about that difference in a second. So the flower is actually the reproductive portion. And so this is, in this particular plant, this is where we will find the gametophyte portion, or the haploid portion of the plant, being present there. And it is worth noting that these will typically grow directly out of the nodes. Okay, so the nodes, the auxiliary bud, can be stimulated by different factors to form the reproductive portion. Okay. The last portion of the shoot that is worth mentioning is the apex. Okay, and the apex is going to be the portion of the plant where we see primary growth. Okay, and so primary growth is occurring out of this end. And so when a plant grows, it's going to grow up higher and higher. Now, if an animal comes along and chews off this primary or the shoot apex, that's going to lead to more growth of the side branches as a result of that. So that's the shoot portion, the portion above the ground. Okay. Under the ground, we also have a portion referred to as the root. And the root's job is going to be to anchor the plant to the ground. It's also going to be an important location for water absorption, an important portion for intake of ions or other nutrients from the soil to support the growth of the plant. And so the root apex, or the root, will be made up of 3 parts. The primary root, sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the tap root, okay? And that's going to be the primary growth, similar to the shoot coming up with the stem. We're going to have a vascular system running all through that. Growing out of these, although there's not nodes present, there will be lateral roots that will grow out of these to sort of spread the root out. And finally, just like the shoot, the root itself will also have a primary growth location referred to as the root apex. And this is going to be the location where primary growth of the root will occur. And so I hope most of what I've gone through there is review, that you've seen this in one way or another, but I want to start with sort of on the same page. Now, when we talk about plants, okay, we're going to, again, focus on the vascular plants. And so the vascular plants are divided into two different types. And so the primary or first type are referred to as gymnosperms, okay, or naked seeds. Evolutionarily speaking, these are much older plants, okay? They don't produce flowers, but they're going to have seeds that are not covered by a fruit or a diploid cell. Okay? The seeds themselves are going to be typically found in the form of a cone. And so the seeds are making up the whole cone. And so we see these as very commonly in conifer trees, firs, pine, and spruce. So they'll have a complete vascular system, as we're going to discuss. The difference here is going to be the reproductive portion of the plant, which is made up of only haploid cells. As opposed to this, we have the flowering plants, like the pea plant we just looked at, which are referred to as angiosperms, or covered seeds. Simply put, this refers to the fact that these particular plants are going to have their seeds covered by a fruit. So the strawberries that we have here are a good example of that. They're also represented by the fact that they produce flowers. Okay? And the flower in this case is the reproductive portion of the vascular plant. So as a quick overview, we're going to do a quick overview of the reproductive portion of the flowering plants. And I'm going to say there's not a lot that we want to get here, but we want to make sure you understand the different parts. So we could divide this into two portions. The female portion, which is the carpel, okay, made up of the stigma, style, ovary, and ovule. The ovule itself being the location where the fertilization will occur. So that's where we're going to form the actual seeds that will be reproduced. And the male portion, which is the stamen. And the stamen's made up of the anther and the filament. So in the case of flowering plants, the anther is going to be the location of pollen formation. Okay? And so the pollen is produced there, and as many of you know, the bees will come in and the pollen will stick to their body. Well, when they go to another flower, the pollen is then delivered to the stigma, and the stigma will collect the pollen and allow it to move in and cause fertilization of the ovule, which will form the mature fruit and the seed that's within there. So that's a real quick overview of the primary parts of the plant and looking at the general life cycle, the haplodiplonic lifestyle. Okay? So that's the end of this video. We'll pick up on the next video looking a little bit closer at the different types of tissue that are in the plant. So thank you for listening. Let me know if you have any questions. Please post them on the Schoology discussion board or contact